"Sir, I'm going to need you to step aside." That's what they said. 2 TSA agents, 1 gate agent, 1 man, 1 first-class boarding pass, and 100 silent witnesses. Dr. Malcolm Reddick didn't argue, didn't raise his voice. He simply looked at the woman behind the counter, calm, composed, but with that look in his eyes. The look of someone used to this, and more dangerously, prepared for it. They didn't know it yet, but the man they just humiliated was the one who built the system that powered this entire airport. 20 minutes later, 6 major airports across the United States would lock out the airline, without a warning, without a sound. But for now, Malcolm simply stepped aside. Tell us where you're watching from in the comments, and hit like if you've ever been judged by how you look, not who you are. Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport, Terminal 4, Gate C-22, 7:43 a.m. The flight to Boston was running on time. Boarding hadn't started yet, but the line at the Sky First counter was already moving. 2 elderly white couples checked in with no issue. Smiles, small talk, jokes about legroom. Malcolm waited behind them, briefcase in hand. Navy suit, charcoal shirt, no tie. Clean-shaven, except for a streak of salt and pepper along his jawline. Eyes sharp, calm like an undisturbed ocean. When it was his turn, the gate agent's expression shifted. Subtly, not outrage, not disgust, but that slight flick of hesitation, that flicker of suspicion, of assumption, that every black professional knows too well. Her name tag read Kelly. "Yes?" she asked, tone clipped. "First class. Reddick. Seat 1A, he said, lifting his phone to display the digital boarding pass. She leaned forward. Her smile disappeared. "This was purchased through your company?" she asked. He arched an eyebrow. "Yes." "Do you have another form of ID?" He held up his government-issued global entry card. Kelly looked at it like it had come from another planet. "One moment," she muttered, reaching for the desk phone. "I need a supervisor." Malcolm said nothing. He didn't roll his eyes, didn't sigh, didn't look around for sympathy. He just stood there, quiet, composed, 1 foot slightly turned out, thumb resting on the leather strap of his briefcase. Behind him, 2 younger white men in business casual stared curiously. One whispered something. Malcolm heard the word fraud float into the air like smoke. He'd been here before, too many times. Moments like this don't get easier. You just learn how to hold your breath without looking like you are. Supervisor Bryce arrived, iPad in hand. Short buzz cut, no eye contact. "We're seeing a booking issue on your seat," he said. "There's no issue," Malcolm replied. "It's confirmed. Corporate account, recurring itinerary. You've seen me before." "I don't recall." "Of course you don't." Bryce gestured subtly. 2 TSA agents shifted into view, a few steps behind. "We're happy to reissue a boarding pass in Economy Plus for now," he offered. "Just until we get this sorted. It's probably a system error." Malcolm smiled. It wasn't warm. "System error, right." He paused, then added softly, "I wrote the system." Bryce blinked. "Excuse me?" "I architected Skyframe. You're using it right now. The gate optimization, the boarding queue AI, the verification algorithm. My team built it. Your terminal wouldn't be running without it." A beat passed. Bryce looked nervous now, but he didn't back off. "This isn't personal, sir. It never is," Malcolm cut in, still quiet. "It's always policy, always protocol, until it's not." Another beat. "Seat 1A is currently unavailable. You'll be in 29E. I trust that's acceptable?" Malcolm looked down at the boarding pass. He looked back up, and for the first time, he spoke with finality. "I'll take the seat." Not because he accepted it, but because he had already made his decision. As he walked down the jet bridge, he passed first class. His assigned seat, 1A, was already filled. A clean-shaven executive in loafers and a Patagonia vest sipped sparkling water, scrolling through emails. Completely unaware he was occupying a place that had already been bought, earned. Malcolm didn't flinch. He kept walking deeper into the fuselage, past business class, past economy plus, all the way to 29E, middle seat, last row, next to the bathroom. He sat down, opened his briefcase, pulled out a black tablet the size of a paperback, biometric locked. No one noticed. They never do. Within seconds, he was inside Skyframe Admin Core. The interface greeted him with quiet precision. Welcome, Dr. Reddick. Root authorization, confirmed. Executive control, active. He scrolled to the protocol control module, tapped once. Clause 19E, emergency ethics override. No one had ever used it before. He'd written it 3 years ago, after a young black engineer was forced off a flight for asking for water twice, after a Muslim judge missed her hearing because the airline refused to validate her ID. Clause 19E was buried deep, hidden under layers of redundancy, untouchable unless you had root access. Only one person in the country did. Him. He tapped into the ethics compliance score for Liberty Air. Behavior index, 71, 100 passenger treatment index, 64, 100 prior warnings, 2. Next consequence, trigger, third strike. Malcolm didn't hesitate. Trigger now. The system executed silently. No confirmation screen. No, are you sure? Pop-up. Just a ripple across the server cloud. At that exact moment, 6 airports received the trigger code. JFK, ATL, LAX, C, DFW, DN. All Skyframe integrated, all running systems that Malcolm had helped build, and all now delivering the same alert to their gate ops dashboards. Liberty Air marked non-compliant under Clause 19E. Boarding access suspended. Immediate ethical review required. Malcolm closed the tablet, slid it back into the briefcase. The plane hadn't even taken off yet. He leaned back in seat 29E. Outside the window, the tarmac glowed under the Arizona sun. He looked calm, almost peaceful, but inside his mind, a different kind of system was already coming online. Because in 20 minutes, Liberty Air would experience what it meant to profile the wrong passenger. And the world? The world was about to learn who Malcolm Reddick really was. Malcolm hated turbulence, not the kind that shook airplanes, but the kind that followed him through life. The kind that started with a look, a doubt, a pause, before a handshake. The kind that had followed him since the south side of Chicago. The plane rocked slightly, somewhere over New Mexico. He barely noticed. His body was still in 29E, but his mind had gone home. He was 13 when he first noticed the weight of being black in a place that didn't expect you to succeed. He was at a science fair, holding a robot he'd built from rewired printer parts. While the other kids got photos with the judges, Malcolm got asked if someone else had helped him. When he said no, the man looked at his father and asked, "Really?" His dad had smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. It was the kind of smile that said, "We've been here before, son. Welcome." Later that night, his father handed him a rusted socket wrench from the garage. "You see this?" his dad said. "This thing doesn't ask to be respected. It just does the job so well, nobody questions it." That stuck with Malcolm. Be so good they have to use you, even if they never thank you. Fast forward to Caltech. First black valedictorian in his program. Still got mistaken for a janitor twice during senior year. Then MIT, where he built an early version of the algorithm that now governs Skyframe's national boarding logic. Still couldn't get a single VC meeting without a white co-founder. So he stopped asking for meetings and built his own company. From a 2-desk WeWork in DC to Skyframe Systems, now powering 19 federal airports, with active proposals in 9 more. And still, they questioned his seat. That part never changed, which is why Clause 19E existed in the first place. The seatbelt sign dinged. A flight attendant pushed a cart past him without eye contact. He didn't need water. He needed his mind to stay sharp. He reopened the tablet. The admin interface pulsed softly. The ethics alert was live. Clause 19E had been executed. Now came the second part, data. Each time the clause was triggered, the system didn't just notify airports. It began real-time collection, passenger reassignment rates by race, boarding denial patterns, complaints buried under guest experience headers, agent override logs, audio capture snippets from flagged gate transactions. Skyframe pulled it all. Because racism didn't always wear a hood or wave a flag. Sometimes it wore a name tag and said, "Can I see your ID?" Just then, his phone buzzed in his pocket. Zoe, his executive assistant, had texted. Zoe, 8:34 a.m. Video of incident already hit 11K views. Someone caught the whole thing. It's spreading on TikTok. You want me to say something? Malcolm, 8:36 a.m. Not yet. Let them talk. We move quiet. Another ping. Zoe, 8:37 a.m. Also, Liberty PR just put out a routine delay statement, calling it a system upgrade hiccup. You were demoted to 29E because of a glitch, apparently. Malcolm exhaled through his nose. Malcolm, 8:38 a.m. Make a note. We respond through consequence, not comment. By the time the plane descended toward Boston, Liberty Air was already experiencing its first operational logjam. 6 airports had red flagged their boarding system. Flights were being held for technical reconfiguration. Internal group chats were flooded with screenshots of gate agents panicking over why Liberty boarding permissions were suddenly disabled. Terminal managers were calling IT vendors. None of them knew that the man sitting in seat 29E was the one who'd pulled the pin. As Malcolm stepped off the plane, the jet bridge buzzed with tension. Ground crew glanced at tablets with furrowed brows. One of the boarding screens flickered behind them, forcing a reboot. He kept walking. A driver held a sign with his name at the gate. "Dr. Reddick, I was told you'd be coming from first class." Malcolm gave a slight nod. Plans changed. They drove through Boston traffic, the city waking up around them. His destination wasn't a hotel. It was Skyframe's Northeast Operations Center, small, quiet, built into a repurposed warehouse. He entered through the rear gate. No press, no noise, just rows of engineers, ethics analysts, and systems devs. His team didn't need introductions. They knew the look in his eyes meant one thing. Clause 19E was no longer theoretical. They dropped what they were doing. "Status?" he asked. James, his director of integrity analytics, spun his laptop around. "Liberty Air, 3 strikes confirmed. Total violation score across 6 airports exceeds federal tolerance. No prior disclosures. 17 suppressed complaint files recovered." Malcolm's jaw tightened. "Any passenger patterns?" Black and brown passengers are 72% more likely to be flagged for secondary check in Liberty's boarding system, James said. In first and business class, the gap grows to 89%. "Show me who signed off." James opened a folder labeled Internal Memo Chains. The signatures were from Liberty Air's ethics chief, their board, their COO. "We've got them," James said. Malcolm nodded once. "Now let's show them what it costs." At 9:47 a.m., Malcolm opened a secure channel to Ethos Vault, the ESG-linked financial compliance platform monitored by the FAA and 4 of the nation's largest ESG investment boards. He didn't accuse. He uploaded data, unfiltered, undeniable. Liberty's ethics score dropped below 62, the minimum required to maintain ESG-aligned status. Within 30 minutes, $1.1 billion in funding was frozen. 3 of Liberty's largest insurance underwriters paused coverage. 2 board members resigned preemptively. The CEO, still quiet, for now. Malcolm sat back. No press conference, no tweet storm, just systems doing what they were built to do. Let others scream. He rewired the machine. As the day wore on, Skyframe's legal and data teams prepped for the next phase. The FAA had requested a closed-door meeting. Congressional aides had begun to circulate rumors. Journalists were catching wind that Clause 19E wasn't a bug, it was a tripwire. Malcolm stayed off camera. He ate lunch at his desk, half a sandwich, black coffee. His assistant walked in, visibly shaken. "Sir, Liberty just emailed you directly." He raised an eyebrow. "Who?" "Richard King, CEO." Malcolm tapped open his inbox. From Richard King, CEO, Liberty Air subject, urgent discussion request, seeking resolution. He didn't open it, not yet. He turned back to his team. "Prepare Phase 2. The email sat unopened for over an hour. Subject, urgent discussion request, seeking resolution. From Richard King, CEO of Liberty Air. Malcolm stared at the subject line while sipping lukewarm coffee, unreadable as ever. Around him, the Skyframe Northeast Command Center hummed like a war room. Data analysts mapped heat signatures of ethics violations across 6 airports. Legal was already syncing with DC policy. PR was silent. Malcolm had forbidden them to speak until he did. At exactly 11:01 a.m., he clicked the message. "Dr. Reddick, I was made aware of the situation regarding your flight this morning and the unintended consequences that followed. Liberty Air has long valued diversity and ethical standards. I'd like to personally speak with you to resolve this matter before it escalates further. My direct line is below. I am available anytime today. With respect, Richard King, CEO, Liberty Air Resolve." That was the word they always used. Like this was a billing issue, a scheduling conflict, a typo in a report. Malcolm pushed the laptop aside and leaned back in his chair. "Zoe," he called. His assistant poked her head in. "Yes? Clear my next call slot. I'm taking this one myself." He dialed the number. It rang twice. Then, "Dr. Reddick, thank you for calling. I hoped you would." "Mr. King." "Please, Richard." Malcolm didn't respond. The silence made Richard nervous. Malcolm could hear it in the shift of breath, the shallow throat clear. People like Richard weren't used to silence. They were used to controlling the tone, the pace, the apology. "Let me begin by saying what happened this morning is unacceptable," Richard said. "No one at Liberty condones that kind of behavior, and we're taking internal steps." "I'm sure," Malcolm said, voice neutral. "But this wasn't a behavior problem. It was a system behaving as it was designed. Then we'll audit that system, fully, with outside counsel." "You've done that before." Richard paused. "I've seen the buried memos," Malcolm continued. "The reflagged complaints, the edited boarding agent logs, the shift in training language. You've had 3 internal audits in 2 years, and you still didn't fix it." "We tried." "No," Malcolm cut in. "You buried it under legal risk assessments and PR damage control." Richard let out a slow breath. "What do you want, Dr. Reddick?" Finally, the real question. "I want consequence," Malcolm said. "Not apology." On the other end of the call, Richard sat in his glass-walled corner office at Liberty's headquarters in Arlington, Virginia, sweat building under his starched collar. 3 of his executive board members had already texted him during this call. "Find out what he wants. We're bleeding at the airports. Can he roll this back?" Richard cleared his throat again. "I understand," he said carefully. "But if Clause 19E continues to lock us out of Skyframe-enabled airports, we're looking at potential loss of over $300 this quarter alone." "That's not my concern," Malcolm replied. "It could be," Richard offered. "We're willing to make significant gestures, public apology, executive resignations, donation to an equity initiative, you name it." "You're offering theater," Malcolm said. "I'm offering reform." "Then tell me, what does that look like?" Malcolm leaned forward in his chair. "I want 3 things," he said. "First, Liberty signs the Passenger Ethics Accord." "The FAA hasn't adopted that yet," Richard countered. "They will. After this week, they won't have a choice." Richard was silent. "Second," Malcolm continued, "you release the internal diversity and profiling audit data from the past 5 years. Full transparency, no spin." That'll tank investor confidence. You should have thought of that before asking for my ID 6 times. Richard flinched audibly. Third, Malcolm said finally, you transfer control of your ethics review board to a neutral oversight group. One not picked by your general counsel. You mean yours? Richard asked, voice sharp. Malcolm smiled faintly. Not mine. The public's. There was a long pause. I have to bring this to my board, Richard finally said. Do that. Malcolm was about to hang up when Richard spoke again. Dr. Reddick, if we do this, you understand it sets a precedent. Other airlines, other companies, they'll be forced to answer to this system. That's the point, Malcolm replied. Then he ended the call. By 2:15 p.m., Malcolm's executive team had convened in the Skyframe strategy room. You just cornered one of the top 3 airline CEOs in the country, James said, grinning. I didn't corner him, Malcolm replied. I built the hallway and waited. The room chuckled, but Malcolm stayed serious. This is bigger than Liberty, he said. We use this moment to push the FAA. The accord gets signed, or this repeats with the next airline that crosses the line. What about retaliation? Zoe asked. You don't think they'll come for us? They already have, Malcolm said. They've just been using bureaucracy and branding to do it. Now we speak the only language that holds. That evening, Malcolm received a ping from his legal counsel. FAA has requested a private meeting re Clause 19E implications. Senators Bell and Ruiz have expressed interest in opening public inquiry. He stared at the message for a moment. Skyframe had been under the radar for years. Powerful, yes, but invisible to the public. This was about to change. Clause 19E had exposed a blind spot the industry didn't want to admit. That ethics wasn't a PR line item. It was infrastructure. And now, it was being enforced. Later that night, back in his suite overlooking the Boston Harbor, Malcolm sat on the balcony, jacket off, sleeves rolled. The city glowed below like a motherboard. Each light a connection, a circuit, a choice. He remembered his father's voice again. Be the tool they can't ignore. He wasn't a tool now. He was the architect. And the system? It had finally answered back. At 8:42 a.m. the next morning, Liberty Air's stock dropped 11.4%. By 9:15 a.m., 3 of its airport partners had quietly suspended access to Skyframe Sync for Liberty's domestic flights. And by 9:27 a.m., Malcolm received a brief notification on his private dashboard. Clause 19E, Phase 2, activated by cross-node escalation. He didn't smile. Not yet. At the FAA headquarters in D.C., chaos brewed behind closed doors. How the hell did this even happen without clearance? Snapped Deputy Administrator Karen Shu, slamming her folder on the desk. Skyframe isn't even an FAA-regulated enforcement system, yet its triggers just wiped out Liberty's federal access overnight. Her chief of staff, Marlin, adjusted his glasses nervously. Technically, Clause 19E is still listed as Experimental Risk Mitigation Protocol. But because Liberty was flagged by 3 independent cross-agency triggers, that's the problem. We never even saw it coming. Across from her, the FAA's Ethics Integration Advisor tapped a line in the report. Reddick didn't use authority. He used design, he said. This isn't just retaliation. It's reform by infrastructure. We ignored the accord. He built his own enforcement. Karen stared at the floor, her mind racing. It wasn't just about Liberty anymore. It was about precedent. Back in Boston, Malcolm walked into a quiet meeting room with his senior counsel, Yvonne Vega, and Zoe, his assistant. No press, no leaks. Just whiteboards and war plans. Phase was triggered early this morning, Yvonne said, flipping her legal binder to the key clause. With 3 airports suspending Liberty's sync nodes and 1.1B in ESG-aligned capital frozen from their investor pool, we've effectively locked them into a compliance bottleneck. Malcolm nodded. And FAA? They're panicking, Zoe added. Half of DC thinks you're trying to privatize aviation ethics. I'm not, Malcolm said. I'm just proving someone has to. Meanwhile, Liberty Air HQ looked like a bleeding empire. Richard King stood in the glass boardroom, his eyes bloodshot. Half his C-suite had dialed in remotely, the rest anxiously scribbling contingency notes. "What do we do if Reddick refuses to roll it back?" asked CFO Tim Garrison. "He's not bluffing," said Layla, the general counsel. "I reviewed the clause framework. He designed it to escalate autonomously once enough nodes agree on a violation." "You mean, we're being judged by airports now?" someone muttered. "No," Richard said bitterly. "We're being judged by the system we ignored." Back in Boston, Zoe returned from a call, her eyes wide. "Malcolm, you're going to want to hear this." He turned from the window. "The FAA just scheduled an emergency session with the Senate Committee on Aviation Oversight, and they invited you. Closed door, 48 hours from now." Malcolm was quiet for a moment. Then, "Send them a reply. I'll attend." "And your talking points?" He didn't blink. "I won't need talking points. I'll bring the receipts." 48 hours later, Washington, D.C. Room 245 of the Rayburn Senate Office Building was lined with closed blinds and cold coffee. The committee chair, Senator Diane Bell, looked across the table at Malcolm, sitting calmly in a dark suit, no tie, flanked by his counsel. "Dr. Reddick," she began, "you've forced 6 major airports into operational review. You've frozen a billion-dollar investment stream, and you've used a private protocol, Clause 19E, that bypassed traditional federal oversight." Malcolm met her gaze. "That's correct. Do you deny that you acted unilaterally to punish Liberty Air?" "I didn't punish them," Malcolm said. "The system did. I just built it to finally do what no one else would. Measure dignity, not just delay times." There was a pause. A few senators shifted uncomfortably. Senator Ruiz leaned forward. "Dr. Reddick, do you believe this is the future of airline regulation?" "I believe it should have been the past," Malcolm replied. "I built Skyframe after your committee tabled the Passenger Ethics Accord for 3 years straight. So yes, if the system you refuse to pass becomes the system I enforce, then that's your answer." The room went still. Senator Bell folded her hands. "What would it take to deactivate Clause 19E and stabilize Liberty Air's operations?" Malcolm paused. "They need to sign the accord, publicly, no edits, and implement third-party oversight within 30 days. And if they don't? They won't just lose airports," Malcolm said. "They'll lose public trust, permanently." Outside the hearing room, whispers were already spreading through Capitol Hill. "He's not a CEO anymore," one aide said. "He's an infrastructure insurgent." "Or a regulator without title," another whispered. But Malcolm didn't care. He hadn't flown across the country to win a PR battle. He was there to make sure no 10-year-old black boy would ever be asked to show ID 6 times again, on a ticket his father paid for. Later that evening, as the Senate issued a statement calling for a new era of airline accountability, Malcolm sat in a quiet cafe near Union Station, watching the rain smear the windows. His father had once said, "Build something that outlives your name." Skyframe would. Clause 19E already had. And Liberty Air? They had 2 choices, comply or vanish. It didn't take long for the public to catch up. By noon, the day after the Senate hearing, hashtags like #Clause 19E, #DignityInFlight, and #Skyframe Shutdown were trending across social media. News anchors argued over whether Malcolm Reddick was a hero or a private tech tyrant. YouTube breakdowns of the Senate session pulled in 2.3 million views in 24 hours. And Liberty Air? They were already drowning. A leaked internal memo from Liberty's executive board hit the press. Due to the freeze on 1.1B in ESG-linked capital and Clause 19E's enforcement at 6 key airports, our operational viability is in jeopardy unless federal mediation is secured within 72 hours. It read more like a surrender note. And Malcolm? He hadn't spoken to the press at all. But that changed when the doorbell rang. It was Zoe, holding her iPad, face tense. "You need to see this." She turned the screen toward him. a clip from a Liberty Air internal meeting secretly recorded, showing an executive mocking the accord saying, "Who cares about ethics scoring? Our real customers are investors, not passengers." Malcolm stared at the screen for a moment, then finally spoke. "Book me for 60 minutes, tonight." The interview aired at 8 p.m. sharp. It wasn't flashy, no big gestures, just Malcolm, seated in a neutral-tone studio, speaking with calm, deliberate conviction. "When you triggered Clause 19E," the interviewer asked, "did you know Liberty's operations would collapse this quickly?" "I didn't design Skyframe to collapse anyone," Malcolm said plainly. "I designed it to reveal them." And what did it reveal? That they thought dignity was optional. The room went quiet. The interviewer looked stunned. America leaned in. By morning, 3 more ESG funds quietly pulled out of Liberty Air. One of them issued a single-sentence statement. "We don't fund companies that fail human decency tests." Meanwhile, a coalition of black tech executives published an open letter titled, "We Stand with Malcolm." The letter called Skyframe the digital Montgomery bus boycott of their generation. And for the first time, Malcolm smiled when he read it. Not out of pride, but because someone finally understood what this was really about. In a sleek boardroom at the headquarters of Altura Ventures, Liberty's largest investor, panic simmered behind closed doors. "What if we force the board to fire Richard?" one partner asked. "Won't change anything," another replied. "Skyframe doesn't care who's in the seat. It cares what systems they protect." One executive leaned back, exhausted. "Then we're not dealing with a man. We're dealing with a standard." They all fell silent, because they knew he was right. That same morning, Malcolm stood at the edge of a runway in Atlanta, invited by a group of regional airport directors for a private ethics roundtable. The air smelled of jet fuel and wet concrete, but the conversations were dry, technical, and transformative. "We're ready to implement a modified passenger ethics protocol," one director said, "based on the Clear Sky structure." "FAA won't oppose it?" Malcolm asked. "They're scared to," another replied. Malcolm nodded slowly. "The point isn't to punish airlines, it's to give passengers a voice that speaks louder than stock prices." They agreed, not because they had to, but because the alternative was becoming unthinkable. By midday, Liberty's communications team attempted damage control. A press release went out. "We acknowledge the importance of accountability and will work with stakeholders to rebuild trust." But the public had moved on. The narrative was no longer about Liberty Air. It was about who would be next. A journalist from the Washington Tribune reached Malcolm for comment. "Do you think this moment is about racial justice, business ethics, or regulatory failure?" He answered simply, "All of the above, and also family." "Family?" she asked. "My son," Malcolm said. "When he turned 12, he asked me why security guards always follow us in stores, why flight attendants look at me twice, why, with all my degrees, I still have to prove I belong in first class." "And what did you tell him?" Malcolm exhaled. "I said, I'm working on it. This is me working on it." That quote went viral overnight. Even late-night hosts picked it up. One of them said, "When the man who built your airport ethics system calmly tells Congress, 'I'm working on it,' you let him finish." But the true shock came 72 hours later. A breaking headline spread like wildfire. Phoenix Technologies acquires Liberty Air's digital infrastructure division in $3.4 billion restructuring deal. It wasn't a hostile takeover. It was a strategic extraction. The data systems, scheduling backbone, and even the AI route mapping tools Liberty once mocked, all of it now belonged to Malcolm. And the kicker? He renamed the division Phoenix Air. Liberty's board issued another press release, this time without any spin. Dr. Malcolm Reddick's firm will oversee Liberty's full transition into the Passenger Ethics Accord within 90 days. Effective immediately, CEO Richard King has resigned. The final twist? Phoenix Air became the first airline subsidiary to implement a passenger dignity scoring system, visible to customers, regulators, and even investors. No more hiding, no more excuses, and no more optional ethics. That evening, Malcolm stood again at the window of his Boston penthouse. Same city, same skyline. But everything had changed. Zoe walked in, holding 2 glasses of scotch. "You did it," she said, handing him one. "No," he replied. "We did it." And as the city lights shimmered below, he whispered to himself, "For every black kid who was ever told to sit down and be quiet, this one's for you." 3 days after the acquisition, Malcolm's inbox looked like a battlefield of momentum and pressure. 37 airport directors wanted access to the Phoenix Air ethics model. 6 U.S. senators had requested private meetings, and his son Miles had texted him, "Dad, kids in school are saying you just became the Black Tony Stark." Malcolm chuckled at that one, but the truth was, he didn't feel like a superhero. He felt like a systems engineer who finally got the green light to fix the damn architecture. At 10 o'clock a.m. sharp, Malcolm walked into the first Phoenix Air strategy meeting since the transition. Everyone stood, not because he asked them to, but because they knew what this moment meant. At the head of the table, he spoke with clarity. "We didn't buy liberty to inherit its sins. We bought it to replace its spine. From this day forward, our mission is simple. Passengers come first, period." He tapped the screen. "Today, we begin drafting the Clear Sky Equity Protocol, not for one airline, for an entire industry." Outside that boardroom, the world was watching. Phoenix Air's rebrand wasn't just corporate, it was cultural. Social media exploded with praise. Travel blogs, ethics panels, and even high school civics classes debated the implications of a company being led by someone who built the tools to measure decency, not just profit. A New York Times columnist wrote, "In an industry ruled by fuel margins and flight delays, Reddick is asking a different question. Who gets to feel safe at 30,000 feet? But not everyone was thrilled. In a dim office in Northern Virginia, representatives from 4 competing airlines met in private. They were nervous, and for good reason. "What's to stop Skyframe from flagging us next?" one asked. "It's not about stopping it," another muttered. "It's about getting ahead of it. Malcolm's setting a new standard, and if we don't adapt fast, the market will exile us. Or the FAA will force our hands," someone added grimly. They all nodded. The game had changed. Meanwhile, Malcolm flew to Chicago for a meeting with a coalition of public interest lawyers, disability advocates, and civil rights organizations. The goal? To co-write the Passenger Dignity Clause, the centerpiece of the Clear Sky Protocol. "This can't just be about race," said Eliana Brooks, a disability rights champion. "It's about passengers with speech delays being treated like threats. It's about trans travelers being body scanned twice because someone's uncomfortable." "I agree," Malcolm said. "That's why the protocol must include multiple lenses: race, age, gender, ability, class, even language bias." They worked for 6 hours straight. When they finished, the room stood up and clapped. Not for Malcolm, but for finally being heard. That evening, Phoenix Air's social team posted an update. "Today, we began drafting the Passenger Dignity Clause with 14 community groups. This isn't PR, it's infrastructure." The post went viral, and it wasn't because of the language. It was because everyone knew they meant it. The next morning, Malcolm received a call from the Secretary of Transportation. "We're reviewing FAA-wide adoption of the Clear Sky Protocol, but there's pushback." "From where?" "The carriers who built their profit models on ignoring people like you." Malcolm didn't flinch. "Then build better models." By the end of the week, Phoenix Air had added 2 more key changes to its operations. A real-time passenger ethics score visible on every boarding pass. An anonymous, verified voice assistant on all aircraft for passengers to report bias or mistreatment without fear. Not a suggestion box, a system with teeth. At the same time, Malcolm's face was everywhere. He was on Time magazine's digital cover with the headline, "The Engineer of Equity." But he hated the attention, because it wasn't about him. One night, while walking the quiet path behind his Boston home, Zoe caught up to him. "You okay?" she asked. He nodded slowly. "It's just, I built Skyframe because I was tired of having to explain my worth. I thought it would live in the background, but now it's the spotlight." "And that scares you?" "No, it humbles me." But not all humility came quietly. That weekend, Malcolm flew commercial, on purpose, coach seat, no entourage, baseball cap pulled low. When the flight attendant recognized him mid-boarding, she froze. "You're Malcolm Reddick?" He smiled gently. "Just Malcolm today." She paused. "I just wanted to say, my brother is autistic, and what you built, it matters. He got through security last week without crying for the first time." He nodded, eyes stinging. "Thank you for telling me." And for the first time in a long time, he felt safe on a flight. Not because of the system, but because someone finally cared. A few days later, the FAA made it official. The Clear Sky Equity Protocol would become a national requirement for all airlines seeking federal compliance by Q4. It was the first time in U.S. aviation history that a passenger dignity framework was elevated to the same tier as safety checks. News anchors called it Reddick's legacy, but Malcolm didn't care about legacy. He cared about impact. In a final touch, Phoenix Air released its core pledge on every aircraft monitor. Every seat holds a story. Every story deserves respect. As Malcolm boarded a quiet red-eye back to Boston, he looked around the cabin. People were smiling, relaxed, diverse. Not because everything was fixed, but because it had finally begun. He closed his eyes, leaned back, and thought of Miles. Someday his son would fly without ever feeling like a suspect. And that was the real destination. 4 weeks after the Clear Sky Protocol became federal law, Malcolm Reddick found himself seated not in a first-class cabin, but across from a U.S. Senate Ethics Subcommittee, once again under the brightest spotlight in Washington. Only this time he wasn't defending himself. He was defining the future. "Dr. Reddick," the chairwoman began, "this hearing isn't just about aviation anymore. It's about precedent. Your framework is now being considered for integration into public transportation, school systems, even AI hiring platforms." Malcolm leaned forward calmly. He'd expected this. "We built Skyframe to evaluate ethical readiness," he said. "Not just for airlines, but for any system that touches the public." A few senators exchanged looks. "So, you're saying this goes beyond airports?" He nodded. "It always did." Back in Boston, Zoe watched the hearing from her office, surrounded by engineers and project leads at Phoenix Labs. "What's the vote count looking like?" someone asked. "Still tight," Zoe replied. "Too many senators funded by legacy travel lobbies." A younger engineer chimed in. "I heard one of the rail networks offered $20 million in dark money to stall adoption of Clear Sky Phase 2. Zoe didn't flinch. "That's why we don't just build tech," she said. "We build transparency." That same week, Malcolm traveled to Houston for a high-stakes private summit with CEOs from 6 major airlines. Most had been silent during the Clause 19E fallout. Now they wanted a seat at the table. The room was modern, cold, and tense. One CEO, middle-aged and clearly uncomfortable, broke the silence. "You know what they're calling this in the industry, right?" Malcolm looked up. "Enlighten me." "The Reddick Wall, a digital ethics firewall that no one saw coming." Malcolm smiled slightly. "Then you weren't looking." Another CEO leaned forward. "We want in, but we need time." "You've had decades," Malcolm said, voice calm but cutting. "You knew bias existed. You just never expected it to cost you money." Meanwhile, the public was already ahead. In Chicago, a group of teen coders from a high school robotics team launched Skywatch, a public-facing dashboard that visualized which airlines had adopted passenger dignity policies and which hadn't. It racked up 5 million hits in 48 hours. The tagline read, "Don't fly blind, know who's flying you." But the real pressure came from abroad. The European Union announced it would require all transatlantic carriers to comply with Skyframe's ethics score minimums by the end of the quarter. That meant any US airline with a low ethics compliance score would lose access to EU airspace, a multi-billion-dollar threat. And suddenly, even the legacy carriers were listening. Back in Washington, the Senate vote passed, 51 to 49. Clear Sky's next phase, covering rail, bus, rideshare, and port systems, was greenlit for federal adaptation. The US had just taken its first step toward nationalized ethical transportation infrastructure. Malcolm didn't cheer. He simply stood up, adjusted his tie, and whispered, "One system at a time." That night, he received a video call from his son, Miles. "Dad, did you hear? They played your quote in my civics class." Malcolm chuckled. "Which one?" "The one where you said, 'We didn't design Skyframe to collapse companies. We built it to reveal them.' My teacher had us break it down like poetry." Malcolm leaned back, pride warming his chest. "You get what it means?" Miles nodded. "It means they can't hide behind uniforms anymore." While America wrestled with adoption, Phoenix Air quietly rolled out a game-changing update. Flight Mirror, an in-flight AI monitor that would notify flight attendants in real time if passenger interactions fell outside the dignity threshold. Not punitive, preventive. Within 2 weeks, passenger satisfaction scores jumped 24%. Bias-related complaints dropped 61%. But not everyone appreciated the change. A viral video showed a first-class passenger berating a Filipino flight attendant, only for the AI system to flag the passenger and reassign them to economy. The clip ended with the captain saying, "Respect isn't optional at 35,000 feet." That line went viral. Even CNN ran a special titled, "Flying with Dignity, the Phoenix Protocol in Action." Meanwhile, industry shakeups continued. 2 CEOs who resisted ethics adoption resigned within days of each other. An anonymous memo leaked from their board read, "We didn't lose to technology, we lost to expectations." In response, Malcolm was invited to keynote the Global Aviation Ethics Summit in Geneva. His speech was simple, almost plain. He spoke of systems, transparency, and accountability. But it was the closing sentence that landed like thunder. Every seat has a cost. Every story has value. The day we forget, that is the day we should all stop flying. He received a standing ovation from 6 continents. Back home in Boston, Malcolm stood at the rooftop of the Phoenix Tower, watching planes draw quiet streaks across the sky. Zoe joined him, 2 coffee cups in hand. "Did you ever think this would happen?" she asked. "No," he said, sipping. "I thought we'd build something powerful, but I didn't know we'd build something unavoidable." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the stars rise behind the jets. Then Malcolm turned, voice steady. "We didn't just rewrite the rules. We rewrote the sky." It began on a Friday afternoon. No press conference, no angry post. Just a quiet message from Phoenix Air's internal server that read, "Effective immediately, Skyframe ethics validation is suspended across 3 airports due to unresolved compliance violations. Reddit command, Clause 19E." And with that, everything stopped. At Logan International, stunned passengers stared at monitors that read, "Gate clearance suspended. Await further instructions." At JFK, a dozen inbound flights circled mid-air, denied landing sequences. At LAX, 3 allied airlines were blocked from boarding. $280 million in estimated losses. In the first 6 hours, Malcolm sat in his office, the room dim, the air still. He didn't flinch. He didn't blink. This wasn't a bluff. It was the execution of a clause he had designed specifically for this moment. Clause 19E, a rare emergency override triggered only when core ethical protocols had been intentionally bypassed across multiple partner terminals. This wasn't a punishment. It was a reckoning. News outlets scrambled. 3 airports locked down by ethics software. Phoenix CEO executes controversial clause, 74 flights grounded. FAA in emergency talks with Skyframe leadership. One anchor asked, "Is this a cyber attack or a moral audit?" The truth? Both. At the FAA's Emergency Command Center, chaos rippled across departments. One official whispered, "Reddick just did in 8 hours what we couldn't do in 8 years." Another replied, "He didn't ground the planes. The system did." But Malcolm's real message wasn't technical. It was personal. And it landed hardest at Sky Blue Transatlantic headquarters in Atlanta. In a private boardroom, the CEO of Sky Blue read the letter that triggered the cascade. It was hand-signed. "Your deliberate override of flight mirror alerts targeting racial bias incidents on flights 928, 401, and 650 constitutes a breach of Skyframe code ethics. Further silence from your team confirms willful suppression. As per Clause 19E, Skyframe will now initiate suspension of your real-time certification relay, lockout from Skygate International syncing, notification to all ESG-linked investors. We didn't ask you to be perfect. We asked you to be honest. You chose neither. Dr. Malcolm Reddick." The CEO folded the letter in silence. By Sunday morning, $1.1 billion in ESG-linked airline investments were frozen. 17 institutional investors placed Sky Blue on ethical probation. The EU delisted them from verified international airspace for 72 hours. It was the largest non-violent disruption in the history of modern commercial flight. But for Malcolm, the pain wasn't in the numbers. It was in the faces of the passengers who'd messaged him in the days prior. "They called me a security risk because I have a stutter. My daughter was touched without consent during a random check. They let others board, then told me my seat was reassigned. I was the only black woman in line." He didn't need more data. He needed a line in the sand. And this was it. Across social media, a movement exploded. Clause 19. Fly with dignity. I stand with Reddick. Thousands of passengers shared their own quiet humiliations, moments they'd buried. One tweet read, "Clause 19 wasn't an overreaction. It was an overdue response." At Phoenix Air's Monday press briefing, Malcolm stepped to the podium alone. No teleprompter, no PR spin. Just a single screen behind him with 5 words, "Dignity is not optional anymore." He spoke calmly. "We're not grounding flights to seek revenge. We're freezing dishonesty. And yes, it hurts. Systems don't change because it's polite. They change because someone decided silence was no longer an option." He paused. "And let me be clear, this isn't about race alone. This is about patterned neglect." Then came the moment no one expected. He announced a new Skyframe mandate. Every participating airline will now be required to publish monthly passenger ethics reports, detailing all complaints, response times, and real-time resolution ratings. Non-compliance will trigger progressive disconnection. Reporters gasped. This wasn't just oversight. It was forced transparency. And it meant one thing: airlines would finally be accountable in public. That evening, major carriers held emergency board meetings. Some fumed, some panicked, but a few, surprisingly, leaned in. The CEO of Air Vista, a mid-sized budget airline, announced, "We're adopting Skyframe full compliance by next month. Not because we're perfect, but because we're tired of pretending we're not flawed." It went viral. Customers flocked. Stocks surged. And within 48 hours, 4 more airlines followed. Meanwhile, Sky Blue's CEO released a short, hesitant statement. "We believe in the value of equity. We're conducting an internal review and will engage with Skyframe as needed." It landed like wet paper. Malcolm didn't reply publicly. He didn't need to. The system spoke for itself. As for Malcolm, he returned to Boston quietly. That night, he met Zoe at a cafe they used to visit back before all this began. "How long can you hold the line?" she asked. Malcolm stirred his coffee. "As long as people remember why it was drawn." Back in his office, he pinned a note to his corkboard. It was scribbled on the back of an airline napkin, left anonymously by a passenger on a recent flight. "Thank you for making the sky feel like it belongs to everyone again." He stared at it for a while, then folded it gently and put it in his coat pocket. Because at the end of the day, that's all Malcolm wanted. Not power, not revenge. Just a sky where his son, and every stranger he'll never meet, could fly without apology. 10 days after Clause 19E brought the airline industry to a halt, Malcolm Reddick walked into a boardroom at the U.S. Department of Transportation, not as a guest, but as the lead architect of the first ever Federal Ethics Infrastructure Committee. Around the table sat officials from the FAA, Department of Justice, Commerce, and even representatives from international aviation bodies. Some greeted him with respect, others with quiet resistance. But none could deny the truth. The man who grounded fleets with silence was now being asked to write the new rules. "Mr. Reddick," said Secretary Marla Chan, "we want to explore implementing your framework as the ethical backbone across all federally funded travel systems, aviation, rail, even ports. What would that require?" Malcolm didn't hesitate. "Transparency, real enforcement power, and the courage to measure what people are afraid to admit." A Justice Department official raised an eyebrow. "Which is?" "Dignity isn't subjective," Malcolm said. "But how we've ignored it for decades, that's systemic." No one argued. Outside the room, public opinion surged. Over 81% of Americans polled said they supported permanent ethics reporting for airlines. A stunning 63% wanted it extended to trains, buses, and ferries. For the first time, ethics and transportation were in the same sentence, and not just as lip service. Meanwhile, at Phoenix Labs, Zoe led a high-pressure sprint to prepare Skyframe for Phase 3 deployment, a nationwide adaptation plan. Their team had just 90 days to integrate Skyframe's core architecture with 6 regional transit networks, including the notoriously outdated Amtrak rail matrix. "How are we supposed to modernize a system built on Windows 98? One engineer groaned. "You don't update the system," Zoe replied. "You give it a conscience." Back in Boston, Malcolm visited South End Community Center, where he'd once taught after-school computer classes long before he became the guy who froze 1.1b. He walked the halls quietly, passing old photos of him and kids who'd long since grown up. In the gym, a group of teenagers were clustered around a laptop, watching TikToks of passengers telling stories of bias on flights. One girl, barely 15, looked up and said, "You're the Sky Guy, right?" Malcolm chuckled. "I've been called worse." The girl pointed at the screen. "This lady says they made her put her baby formula through 3 scanners while the white lady behind her walked through with 2 bottles and no questions." Malcolm nodded. "That's why we built Skyframe." The boy next to her tilted his head. "But it's just tech, right? Like code and sensors." Malcolm crouched down. "It's more than code. It's code with memory, code with receipts. It doesn't just log what happens, it remembers what shouldn't." Later that week, a surprise endorsement came from an unlikely source. The International Aviation Consortium, which had long resisted US-led regulation, issued a formal statement. "The Skyframe system represents a viable path forward for global ethical aviation standards. We will consider pilot programs in European and South American sectors effective next quarter." It was a seismic shift. And just like that, Skyframe went global. But Malcolm wasn't celebrating. He was preparing, because not everyone wanted reform. Inside a high-rise in Dallas, a coalition of airline lobbyists, legacy CEOs, and political donors met in secret. Their mission? To kill Clear Sky, or at least stall it beyond the next election cycle. "They're calling this a dignity revolution," one exec sneered. "But dignity doesn't pay dividends," another replied. "No, but it sure freezes them." Their plan was simple. flood Congress with a passenger experience bill, an intentionally vague proposal that sounded pro-customer but subtly weakened enforcement, removed public reporting, and stripped Skyframe's legal authority. They hoped it would pass quietly. But Malcolm wasn't a rookie. The moment the draft leaked, Zoe intercepted it. She walked straight into Malcolm's office, laptop in hand. "They're coming," she said, dropping the device on his desk. He scrolled, read, paused. Then he picked up his phone and called one person, Governor Tanya Holmes, chair of the National Infrastructure Equity Council. Within 48 hours, the counterstrike was ready. It came in the form of a public broadcast from Capitol Hill. Governor Holmes, flanked by Malcolm and Secretary Chan, stood before the press. "Today," she announced, "we are introducing the Passenger Integrity Act, a federal bill requiring all public and private travel systems receiving government funds to adopt verified, independent ethics systems within 12 months. And yes, that includes airlines, railroads, ferries, and even ride shares." Reporters went into a frenzy. She looked at Malcolm. He stepped up. "We're not regulating emotions," he said. "We're certifying behavior. If you touch the public, you must be worthy of their trust." That night, Phoenix's announcement video dropped on YouTube, and telltales went viral within hours. The video opened with real clips from passengers describing moments of injustice in their own words. It ended with a quiet black screen and the line, "For every flight we missed, we never missed the point. Clear sky." Now, within 72 hours, 2.6 million people signed the online petition. 4 major airlines preemptively committed to clear sky compliance. One airline CEO resigned. And perhaps most importantly, Congress blinked. In Boston, Malcolm walked the Charles River at sunset, Miles at his side. "Do you think it'll stick this time?" his son asked. Malcolm thought for a long moment. "If enough people remember what it felt like to be invisible, it will." Miles kicked a rock. "I used to think dignity was just about how you looked." "It's not," Malcolm said. "It's about whether people see you when they don't have to." And across terminals, train stations, and bus depots nationwide, something small but powerful began to spread. Signs that read, "You are being seen, you are being counted, you are being heard." Some passengers took photos, others cried. But all of them understood the message. The sky wasn't just changing, it was watching. And this time, it was watching for them. 6 weeks after Malcolm Reddick's silent protest disrupted aviation networks across the country, the air was different. Not just in how planes flew, but in how people were seen. The moment had evolved into a movement. And now, that movement demanded law. In Washington, D.C., the Rayburn House office building was packed. Media crews, civil rights leaders, transportation officials, and former passengers filled every seat. The hearing was live-streamed across every terminal, every gate screen, every airline's app notification bar. The title of the session was simple: Passenger Dignity in Federal Aviation. But this wasn't about buzzwords. It was about rewriting how the nation measured respect in transit. Malcolm sat at the center of it all, not as a guest, but as the co-author of the very proposal under review, the Clear Sky Equity Protocol, a federal mandate rooted in data, dignity, and design. Senator Ramirez leaned forward, microphone hot. "Mr. Reddick, let me be blunt. This protocol, Clause 19E, Skyframe, the compliance scoring, it's a lot of power to give one system. What makes you think it's ready to scale nationwide?" Malcolm didn't blink. "Because bias is already nationwide," he replied calmly. "The only difference is, now we can measure it." There was a beat of silence, then murmurs, then applause. But not everyone was clapping. In the back rows, airline lobbyists whispered to one another. The hearing had been scheduled with hopes of neutralizing the clear sky momentum, but the public was too invested now. And Malcolm? He was playing chess 3 moves ahead. A screen flickered behind him as he tapped his tablet. "Let me show you something," he said. The hearing room dimmed. The screen lit up with real-time data visualizations. Disparities in how passengers of color were flagged for extra screening. Maps of service inconsistencies by zip code. Emotion detection metrics from AI used at boarding gates. This isn't theory. This is live data from your constituents' lives. Then the slide changed. A single sentence appeared in white text over a black screen. "Your dignity shouldn't depend on your gate number." Gasps, camera shudders, tweets mid-type. Senator Riley, once a skeptic, leaned into his mic. "You're saying Skyframe can monitor all this across every airline?" Malcolm nodded. "It doesn't monitor. It remembers. And it learns." The next 48 hours blurred into press conferences, roundtables, and emergency sessions. The FAA issued a provisional report endorsing Skyframe, citing a 37% drop in passenger complaints on compliant test routes. That same day, the House Transportation Committee voted to move the Clear Sky Equity Protocol to the full House floor, an unprecedented pace for ethics legislation. Zoe called from Boston, her voice trembling. "They just pinged us. FAA wants Phase 4 compliance integration in 90 days. Malcolm closed his eyes. It's happening. But the victory wasn't just legal, it was cultural. On social media, #ClearSkyNow trended for a record 13 days. TikTok creators reenacted famous discrimination cases, this time with alternate endings where power was returned to the passenger. In Los Angeles, a grassroots campaign turned bus shelters into art installations about travel dignity. And in Atlanta, Delta's new training included the phrase, "Passenger dignity isn't optional, it's the runway." Malcolm watched all of it with quiet awe. He'd built the system, but now the people were flying it. 2 weeks later, the FAA administrator stepped onto the podium flanked by Senate leaders, the Secretary of Transportation, and Malcolm himself. The room hushed. "With unanimous interagency support," the administrator began, "we are proud to announce the official adoption of the Clear Sky Equity Protocol as a federal mandate." Cameras flashed. Reporters scrambled. "Effective immediately, all federally certified commercial airlines must integrate Skyframe into their operations within the next 180 days. Non-compliance will result in restricted airspace access, revoked funding, and public ethics scoring visible to passengers." Malcolm stood silently beside her. No smile, just presence. He wasn't here to celebrate. He was here to witness accountability being written into code. Afterward, as officials mingled and press swarmed the stage, Malcolm walked out into the cold air of the Capitol steps. He dialed Zoe. "It's law," he said. On the other end, she laughed through her tears. Back home in Silver Spring, he sat on the edge of his bed that night, staring at the folded letter on his nightstand, the one from his mother written just before she passed. "You will change systems, not just companies," she had written. "But don't forget to change hearts too. Start with your own." Malcolm exhaled. For the first time in months, the silence in the room felt earned, not empty. He had grounded a fleet. But more importantly, he'd cleared the sky. 3 months had passed since the Clear Sky Equity Protocol became federal law. The skies were quieter, but not in volume. Quiet in tension. The kind of quiet when a long fight is finally over, or at least paused. Malcolm Reddick had intentionally stepped back from the spotlight. No press, no panels, no speeches. He was done explaining justice to people who had never been denied it. Instead, he returned to something simpler, flying. On a chilly Thursday morning in March, Malcolm walked into Reagan National Airport. No entourage, no suit. Just a black hoodie, his tablet, and a first-class ticket in hand. He wanted to see it for himself. Not a demo, not a hearing, a flight. Gate C-24, Sky Blue Transatlantic, Flight 741 to San Francisco. It was the same airline, the same route, the same gate that had denied him months earlier. But this time, everything felt different. The gate agent looked up and smiled. "Good morning, Mr. Reddick. First-class boarding in just a moment. And thank you, truly, for everything." No awkward glances, no hesitation in her voice, no flag on the system. When he stepped onto the plane, the lead flight attendant gave a small nod. "Dr. Reddick, we've been briefed. If there's anything we can do, you just let us know." That used to be code for "we're watching you." Now it sounded like they actually meant it. He sat in 2A, leather soft. No eye rolls from fellow passengers. No, "how did he get that seat" stares. Just normal. And that made Malcolm emotional in a way he didn't expect. The seat beside him was still empty when the last few passengers trickled in. Then she arrived. An older black woman, elegant, maybe late 70s. Her hair was a soft crown of silver curls, her eyes alert but kind. She looked at him, paused, then smiled. "Mind if I sit here?" she asked, gesturing to 2B. Malcolm stood slightly to let her in. "Of course not." As she settled in, she glanced over and gave a small, knowing smile. "I know who you are." Malcolm chuckled. "That obvious?" She waved her hand. "Not the fame, the energy. You carry it like someone who's tired but still standing." Her name was Lucille Franklin, a retired civil rights attorney from Oakland. She'd flown in to visit her great-granddaughter but was heading back home. They talked about the movement, about the stories that never made the news, about what it meant to fight the same battle across different decades. "You didn't just build software," she said at one point. "You built a mirror and forced a whole industry to look." Malcolm was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes I wonder if it'll last." Lucille turned to him, stern now. "Then make sure it does. Write the next version. Train the next you." He nodded slowly. The words didn't feel like praise. They felt like a charge. As the plane reached cruising altitude, the pilot came over the speaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Sky Blue 741. In case you haven't heard, our airline now complies fully with the Clear Sky Protocol." Murmurs spread through the cabin. Some passengers clapped. Lucille leaned in and whispered, "You hear that? That's the sound of the sky shifting." Malcolm looked out the window. The clouds rolled by in perfect silence, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like he was flying alone. Back in San Francisco, Malcolm didn't return to a boardroom. He didn't walk into a tech lab or a think tank. Instead, he walked into a middle school, a public charter school in Bayview Hunters Point, where the air still carried echoes of systemic neglect, and kids still dreamed loud despite it. He'd made a promise to himself on that flight. If change was going to last, it had to start here. The principal, a sharp woman in her 30s named Ms. Rivera, welcomed him with cautious optimism. "They know who you are," she said. "Some of them even think you're Iron Man without the suit." Malcolm laughed. "Tell them I'm more like Alfred, building the tools in the cave." She smirked. "They'll love that." The students were already waiting. Dozens of bright eyes, different shades of defiance and hope, looking up from folding chairs. Malcolm didn't use a mic, didn't bring a deck. He just spoke. About code, about ethics, about what happens when you're underestimated, and why that's your sharpest weapon if you use it right. He shared the story. Not the scandal, the story. The denial, the silence, the phone call, the system behind the system, the consequences, and how every line of code in Skyframe was written with them in mind. A girl in the front row raised her hand. "Are we going to build stuff like that too?" Malcolm smiled. "You're going to build better." And just like that, something shifted. Not just in them, in him. Later that day, he signed the first partnership agreement with the school. A $2.8 million pilot program called Project Altitude, where underrepresented youth would be trained to build ethical tech infrastructure for public systems, airlines, hospitals, cities, not just to code them, to guard them, to lead them. Later that night, Malcolm sat on the rooftop terrace of his home in Pacific Heights, legs stretched out, glass of ginger tea resting on the railing beside him. The breeze off the bay swept across his face, and in the hush of the night, the lights of the Bay Bridge shimmered like a nerve center pulsing in the dark. He hadn't sat up here in months. This view used to be a place of strategy. Now it felt more like a moment of surrender, but not defeat. Evolution. His tablet buzzed. Incoming call. Zoe Sinclair. He grinned. The timing couldn't have been better. "Dr. Reddick," Zoe said, her face filling the screen with a half-exhausted smirk of someone who hadn't slept in Brussels time for 3 days. "Did I just see a new grant drop with your name on it? You stalking my philanthropic side now? Only when it has a $2.8 million price tag and a privacy embargo." They both laughed, but Zoe's eyes were scanning him. She noticed the calm in his shoulders, the absence of the usual sharpness. "You flew again," she said, not as a question, but as a quiet observation. "I did. And? It didn't feel like a test this time. No hidden hands, no loaded gazes, just dignity. Must have been a hell of a crew." "No," Malcolm replied. "It was a hell of a protocol." Zoe leaned back. "You know what you did, right? You didn't just build something to punish injustice. You coded a ceiling into the industry, one that forces them to grow taller if they want to survive." He exhaled. "I don't want to run another company, Zoe." "Then what do you want?" "To build altitude. Not tech, not money, not ego. Just give these kids a radar before they ever hit turbulence." "You mean Project Altitude?" "I mean more than that. A global platform. Schools, certifications, labs for tech ethics, a network. By us, for us. Powered by those who felt the weight of exclusion and turned it into propulsion." She stared at him, not with shock, with recognition. "And I want you to run the EU pillar." Took you long enough to ask. They sat in silence, not awkward silence, sacred. The kind that settles between people who've fought too many quiet wars together to need small talk. "Do you remember your first rejection?" Malcolm asked suddenly. "MIT doctoral board. They said emotion-based ethics was a bias risk, because I came from a Caribbean family." "Freshman year," Malcolm said. "Submitted a system that optimized airport security queues. They accused me of plagiarism. Said someone like me didn't look like a systems architect. Someone like you. Yeah, someone black, working night shifts to stay enrolled. No legacy. So you built one. I didn't build it for me. I know. Another beat. It's time to open source the blueprint, not just protocols, pathways. Equity shouldn't be hidden behind capital or code." Zoe smiled. "Let's make it happen. Not in 5 years, now." Malcolm raised his glass of tea. "To the last storm I'll ever fly through alone. To the next sky we'll help them claim." The call ended, but the rooftop didn't feel quiet anymore. It felt alive. Malcolm looked out at the bay, and in his mind, he saw a different kind of system. Not one of gates or firewalls, but corridors of trust. Networks that saw people before profiles. This was no longer about an airline. This was about air itself, and who had the right to breathe freely within it. Once, he had flown through storms to build something for himself. Now, he would build so no one else had to. Not alone. Not again. 10 months later, National Aviation Reform Conference, Washington, D.C. The lights dimmed in the packed convention center. Every major airline executive, regulator, airport director, and ethics board member sat silent as the stage lit up in a soft, deliberate gold. A spotlight landed on the keynote podium. Dr. Malcolm Reddick stepped up to the mic. The last time this many cameras were on him, it was chaos. This time, it was invitation. He wasn't wearing a tie, just a black mandarin collar jacket and a quiet presence that carried more weight than any title. He scanned the crowd and began, voice steady. "Last year, I boarded a plane expecting to fly. What I experienced instead was a reminder that visibility doesn't equal value, and that dignity still has gatekeepers. There were murmurs. Everyone remembered the headlines. In those 20 minutes, I was reduced to a seat number, disregarded not for what I lacked, but for what I represented. That moment didn't just ground a plane. It grounded an entire industry's illusion of progress. A beat of silence. Then he smiled, just slightly. But this isn't a story about me. It's about what happens when one system refuses to bend, and another system is ready to rise. The screen behind him lit up. Clear Sky Equity Protocol. Now live across 6 countries, 31 airports, 58 airlines. Gasps. Applause. This protocol isn't a threat. It's a mirror. A tool to measure who we are when no one's watching, and who gets to belong without needing to prove it first. Behind him, a real-time feed of flight status updates appeared. This time color-coded not just by weather, but by ethics rating. Green for compliant, yellow for under review, red for grounded under the Clear Sky system. Executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A few leaned forward, inspired. We've spent decades regulating metal, altitude, and fuel efficiency, but we forgot the people inside the planes. The single mother getting ignored, the veteran disrespected, the teenager profiled, the CEO dismissed because he didn't fit the first-class look. He paused. No more. Another slide appeared. Passenger Dignity Index, launching Q1 across all U.S. hubs. Every airport that partners with Skygate Nexus will now require baseline ethics training, dignity reporting systems, and real-time accountability tracking. This isn't a PR move. It's policy. And if you can't meet it, you don't fly. Thunderous applause. From the front row, Zoe Sinclair stood with her hand over her heart. Beside her sat his son, Jordan, recording everything on his phone. In the back, reporters whispered to each other. This wasn't just a protocol. This was the beginning of ethical aviation. Malcolm continued, but his tone softened. My mother raised me to believe you shouldn't have to own the plane to be treated like a person on it. That belief built the very code that's now regulating access to the sky. He looked up for a long second. I dedicate this to her, and to every person who's ever been made to feel small in a place meant to carry them high. The screen faded to a simple phrase. The sky belongs to all of us. Then applause. Long, sustained, not performative, but earned. Malcolm stepped away from the mic. He didn't bow, he didn't wave. He just smiled, quietly, and walked off stage. Afterward, a different departure. 2 weeks later, Malcolm boarded a flight to London for a summit with the Civil Aviation Union. He wore no badge, no assistant, no security. Just a carry-on, a book, and his silence. When he reached the gate, a young agent greeted him with a nervous smile. Good evening, Dr. Reddick. Thank you for flying with us. He nodded politely. As he approached the jet bridge, the captain, black, mid-40s, stepped out of the cockpit, extended his hand, and said, Because of you, sir, my daughter's studying aerospace without ever asking if she belongs. Malcolm shook his hand, then turned, stepped into the aircraft, and for the first time in a long, long time, he flew without looking over his shoulder. Have you ever felt invisible in a place where you should have been respected? Or, what would you have done if you were in Malcolm's shoes that day? Tell us where you're watching from, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Your story might inspire someone else to speak up too. And remember, dignity isn't a luxury. It's a right. If this story hit you hard, share it with someone who needs to see how one voice can ground an entire system and lift others in the process.